She called me on a Thursday afternoon to tell me I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving dinner, the dinner I had already paid for. Let me say that again, so it sinks in. My daughter called me, her father, 11 days before Thanksgiving to inform me, calmly and without a trace of guilt in her voice, that I would not be welcome at the table. The reservation at the Hartwell Inn, the private dining room, the deposit I had wired 2 months earlier, all of it was still going forward. Just without me. "Dad, it's just easier this way," she said. "Derek's family is coming and it gets complicated." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was sitting in my kitchen in Raleigh, the same kitchen where I had made her pancakes every Saturday morning for 15 years, and I could not find a single word. "Complicated," I finally said. "You know how it is." I didn't, actually, but I told her I understood, said goodbye, and set the phone down on the counter. Then I sat there for a long time, looking at nothing. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 67 years old, retired after 31 years as a civil engineer, and I have one daughter. Just one. Her mother passed when my daughter was 22, and from that point forward it was just the two of us. I told myself that's why I gave so much. Because there was no one else. Because I was trying to fill a space that couldn't be filled. Her name is Natalie. She married Derek 6 years ago. I remember the wedding. I paid for the wedding. Not partially. Fully. The venue in Charleston, the caterer, the flowers, the photographer, $114,000, which at the time I considered money well spent because she looked happy. She looked genuinely happy, and I thought, this is what it's for. Derek sold insurance. He was good at it in the way that people who are very comfortable with selective truth tend to be good at sales. He had a firm handshake and remembered names and laughed at the right moments. I wanted to like him. I tried to like him. They bought a house in Cary about 20 minutes from me in 2021. The market was brutal that year, as anyone who was trying to buy property in North Carolina knows. They found a place they loved. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard that backed up to a small pond, and it was priced at $430,000. Their pre-approval came in lower than expected because Derek had some credit history that, as he put it, needed context. Natalie called me. "Could I help with the down payment?" "Just a bridge loan," she said. "Just temporary." I gave them $60,000. I did not ask for a promissory note because she was my daughter, and I believed in keeping things simple between family. That was my first mistake, and I want to be honest about my mistakes in this story because this is not a story about me being perfect. It is a story about what happens when you confuse love with obligation, and when the people you love most learn to confuse them too. Over the next 3 years, the help continued. It was never dramatic, never a single enormous ask. It was a rhythm. The furnace needed replacing. I covered it. Derek's car was totaled, and insurance didn't fully bridge the gap. I wrote a check. Natalie wanted to start a small interior design business, needed software and a website and business cards and a part-time assistant for the first 6 months. I funded it. Each individual thing seemed reasonable. Each individual thing, added up over time, came to just over $220,000 beyond the wedding and the down payment. I'm not telling you this to sound like a martyr. I was not keeping a ledger at the time. I was a father who had money and a daughter who needed help, and I did not see anything wrong with that picture. My own father helped me when I was starting out. That's what you do. What I did not see, what I refused to see, if I am being honest, was the dynamic that was quietly forming. The help had become expected, not appreciated. Expected. There is a difference, and it is enormous, and by the time I understood it, the difference had cost me considerably more than money. The first sign I should have caught came about 18 months before that Thanksgiving phone call. Natalie and Derek had us, me and my older brother Ray and his wife, who are the only family I have close by, over for a cookout in July. At some point in the afternoon, I overheard Derek talking to Ray near the back fence. He didn't know I was close enough to hear. He was explaining, in the patient tone of a man explaining something obvious, that Natalie handles her dad. He's generous when you don't push. He said it the way you might describe a client you've learned to manage. Ray didn't respond, but his face did something I recognized. He looked uncomfortable. I walked back inside and got myself another glass of sweet tea and did not say anything about it. I told myself I had misheard, or that it was a thoughtless comment, not a reflection of anything real. I was good at telling myself things like that. The autumn before Thanksgiving, things started to shift in ways I couldn't quite ignore. Natalie became harder to reach. Calls went to voicemail more often. When we did talk, there was a quality to the conversation that felt like she was elsewhere, like she was in the middle of doing something else and the call was an interruption. I asked her once if everything was okay, and she said, "Dad, you worry too much." Which is probably true, but I was also not wrong. In September, she asked me for something different from the usual asks. She and Derek wanted to expand the house, add a sunroom, and update the kitchen. She had gotten a contractor quote. The number was $88,000. She asked if I could cover it. No mention of paying it back. No loan framing this time. Just, could I cover it? I told her I needed to think about it. For the first time in 6 years, I did not say yes immediately, and I could hear something change in her voice. Not anger exactly, more like recalibration. Like she was adjusting something internally. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to Ray, who told me plainly what I already knew but hadn't let myself say out loud. "You've been carrying them for years," he said, "and they don't even see it anymore. That's the problem." I decided not to fund the renovation. I called Natalie and told her I was sorry, but I wasn't in a position to help with this one. I said it gently. She said she understood. We hung up, and the conversation felt civil, and I thought maybe the boundary had landed okay. It had not landed okay. The next 6 weeks were the coldest I had experienced from my daughter since she was a teenager. Short texts, canceled plans. One Sunday dinner that got rescheduled 3 times and eventually just quietly dropped. I did not push. I thought she needed time to adjust and that things would return to normal. Then came the Thursday phone call. The Thanksgiving phone call. The dinner I had reserved and paid for. The dining room I had booked at the Hartwell Inn, specifically because Natalie had once mentioned she loved that place. The meal that was supposed to be a family gathering. I was being disinvited from it. "Derek's family is large," she explained, "and it gets chaotic. And honestly, Dad, you and Derek in the same room is just tense." I asked her when it had become tense. I said I had never been anything but civil to Derek. "You're civil," she said, and she said it in a way that somehow made civil sound like an insult. "But Derek feels judged." I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the fact that Derek, who had accepted over $200,000 of my money across 6 years, felt judged by me. "Natalie," I said, "I paid for that dinner." "I know," she said, "and we appreciate it." The word "we" had me somewhere specific. "We." "You appreciate it," I said. "Dad, don't make this into something it isn't." I told her I needed to go. She said okay, that she'd call me after the holiday. I said fine. I hung up. That evening, I drove over to Ray's house. I sat in his kitchen and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always loved about my brother. When I finished, he didn't say "I told you so." He just sat there for a moment and then said, "What do you want to do?" And that was when something shifted in me. Not rage. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't spite. It was something quieter and more deliberate. It was the feeling of a man who has been sleepwalking for 6 years and has just woken up and is looking at the room around him clearly for the first time. "I want to stop," I said. Ray nodded, then stop. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia, who has managed my accounts for 12 years and who does not waste words. I told her what was happening. I told her I needed to make some changes. We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of the call, I had a plan. The first thing I did was stop the automatic transfer I had set up 18 months earlier without fully thinking through the implications to help cover their monthly expenses during a stretch when Derek's commissions had been low. It was $1,500 a month. I had never formally ended it. I called the bank and ended it. The second thing I did was contact my estate attorney, a man named Paul who had handled my wife's estate and who knew my full financial picture. I told him I wanted to revise my will and restructure certain assets. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. The third thing I did was pick up the phone and call the Hartwell Inn. I spoke to the events coordinator, a kind woman who remembered me from when I had made the reservation. I explained that there had been a change in plans and that I needed to understand my options. The reservation was in my name. The deposit, $3,500, was on my credit card. The remaining balance was not yet charged. I told her I would need to cancel the private dining room reservation. She processed the cancellation. The deposit was non-refundable under standard policy, but she was gracious enough to apply it as a credit toward a future reservation in my name. I thanked her and hung up. Natalie called me 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. The message said that she had tried to confirm the head count with the Hartwell Inn and had been told the reservation no longer existed. "Dad, what did you do? Call me back." I called her back that evening. "I canceled the reservation," I said. The silence on the other end was the kind of silence that has weight. "You can't just cancel it," she said. "We had plans." "I made those plans," I said, "and I was told I wasn't welcome. So it didn't seem right to keep paying for something I wasn't invited to." "This is so childish," she said, and her voice had moved into a register I hadn't heard from her before. Not quite anger, not quite panic, something between the two. "Derek's family is expecting a dinner. There are 12 people." "Then Derek's family can make a reservation," I said. "I'm sure the inn has other dates available." She said she couldn't believe I was doing this. She said I was being vindictive. She said I had never liked Derek, and this was just me finding a way to hurt them. I let her say everything she needed to say, and when she was done, I said, "Natalie, I have given you and Derek a great deal over the past 6 years, more than I should have. Not because you asked wrong, but because I gave without thinking carefully about what I was building. I'm done building that. I love you. That is not going to change, but I am done." She hung up. My estate meeting with Paul went well. I won't go into every detail because some of it is private, but the core of it was this. I restructured my assets into a revocable living trust with terms that reflected my current wishes rather than assumptions I had made years ago. The trust named my brother Ray as primary trustee in the event of my incapacity. Charitable distributions were added for 2 organizations my wife had supported: the Raleigh Literacy Program she had volunteered with for years, and the Children's Hospital Fund she believed in deeply. Natalie was not removed entirely. I am not a cruel man. But the terms changed considerably, and more importantly, the automatic financial support, the monthly transfer, the on-call, yes, the reflex of reaching for my checkbook whenever a call came in, all of it stopped. There was a period of about 3 weeks where Natalie tried various approaches. There was the angry call. There was the guilt call. "I just don't understand what happened to us, Dad. I feel like you hate me." There was the negotiating call, where she suggested we meet for coffee and talk things through. There was even a call from Derek, which I did not see coming, in which he told me he had a lot of respect for me and hoped we could get back to a good place. I listened to him complete that sentence and then told him I hoped he had a good evening. I did not meet for coffee. I said I needed time and that I would reach out when I was ready. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with Ray and his wife and their son, who drove down from Virginia. We had turkey and green bean casserole and my sister-in-law's sweet potato pie, which I have been eating for 30 years, and it was the best Thanksgiving I could remember in a long time, partly because of the food and partly because every person at that table was genuinely glad I was there. December was quieter. Natalie texted a few times. I responded, briefly and without coldness. I was not trying to punish her. I was trying to recalibrate the relationship from the ground up. There is a difference. I told her I loved her. I told her I was not angry. I told her I needed her to understand that the way things had been was not sustainable and that what came next had to be different. In January, she called me and asked if I wanted to come for dinner. Just the 2 of us. Derek was going to be out of town for work. I said yes. I drove to Cary on a Friday evening. She had made pot roast, which was her mother's recipe, and when I walked in and smelled it, I had to stand in the entryway for a moment. Some things hit you in ways you don't fully anticipate. We ate, and we talked, and it was careful and a little halting in the way that 2 people rebuilding something are always careful and halting. She said she was sorry. Not a full accounting. I don't think she fully understood yet. Everything she needed to understand, but a beginning. She said she had been selfish. She said she had let Derek's attitude toward me become her attitude, and that it wasn't right. I told her I accepted her apology. I told her I loved her. I told her the relationship I wanted with her was one where I was her father and not her bank, and that I believed she was capable of that relationship if she wanted it. She cried a little. I didn't. I had done my crying privately, alone in my house in October, sitting in my kitchen at 2 in the morning looking at a photograph of her mother on the refrigerator, wondering where the years had gone and what I had done with them and whether any of it could be fixed. I think it can be fixed. That's why I'm telling this story. Not to document what they did wrong, not to settle a score in public. I'm telling it because I know there are other fathers out there, and mothers too, who are sitting in their kitchens right now, having just hung up a phone call that left them staring at the wall. Fathers who have given, and somewhere along the way the giving stopped meaning anything because it had become automatic. Because love had quietly become a transaction and no one said out loud when that happened. The money I gave over those years is gone. I don't expect it back. But the understanding I found on the other side of all of it, the clarity, the sense of myself as a person with limits and dignity, that's worth something I can't put a number on. I am 67 years old. I have good health, a brother who answers when I call, a pot roast dinner waiting on the other side of a quiet January drive, and a daughter who I believe still has the capacity to be the person I know she is underneath all of it. That's enough. For now, that's enough. I keep coming back to that moment in Ray's kitchen. Not the Thanksgiving call, not the cancellation, not even the dinner that Natalie made in January with her mother's pot roast recipe. I keep coming back to the moment Ray asked me, "What do you want to do?" And I realized I hadn't been asked that question, genuinely asked it in years, maybe longer. There's something that happens when you give without limits for long enough. The giving stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like an identity. And when your identity is wrapped up in being the person who provides, you stop noticing when the people receiving start to see you only as a function. Not a father, not a man with his own grief and his own limits, just a function. I don't blame Natalie entirely. I built that dynamic too. Every time I said yes without pausing, every time I wrote a check to smooth over a discomfort, I was teaching her something I didn't mean to teach. I was teaching her that my love had no conditions, but also no edges, that I would absorb whatever came my way and keep producing. That's not generosity. That turns out to be its own kind of failure. The failure of a man who confused being needed with being loved, and kept that confusion going for 6 years because the alternative was too painful to look at directly. What I had to find, what I think every person eventually has to find, one way or another, was the backbone to tell the truth even when the truth was costly. That took longer than I want to admit. It wasn't until I was sitting alone in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, looking at a photograph of my late wife, that I understood she would not have recognized the man I had become in those 6 years. Not because I was bad, but because I had stopped standing up straight. Derek is a smart man in certain ways. He read me accurately for a long time. He's generous when you don't push. That's a damning thing to overhear about yourself. But the smarter move, the one I had to make when I finally woke up, was to understand that being readable is not the same as being weak, and that changing was still possible. The mind I had built over 67 years, the one that designed infrastructure, that managed finances carefully, that saw through complicated problems. That mind had been asleep on the subject of my own household. I had to wake it up and use it honestly, the way I would use it for anything else that mattered. The pot roast dinner in January was not a resolution. It was a beginning. Natalie has more growing to do, and so do I. But what I know now that I did not know before is that the most important thing I could give her, the thing no check could buy, was the example of a man who, when he finally understood what was happening, had the character to change course, not out of anger, out of clarity. I canceled a reservation. I stopped a bank transfer. I rewrote a will. But what I actually did was decide, at 67, that I still had enough life ahead of me to spend it differently. That decision, quiet, deliberate, made in a lawyer's office and a kitchen and a late-night phone call, was the most fatherly thing I had done in years. Some things only come clear after a long time. That doesn't mean they come too late.